about to take a corner. So I figured for this one I'd give you guys a little bit more detail on what transpired to essentially put me in this car. The initial spark was, like I mentioned in the video, I had a buddy of mine lend me keys to his 330i, took it out of the mountains. He had a 335. We had a really good time. And at that point, it was the first time I took a rear-wheel drive, for the most part, but relatively peppy, fun car up to the mountains. It had always been on motorcycles. All three of mine have been up there. But for some reason, I'd never gone with a car. It just, every time I ever thought about going up to the mountains, it was always to go ride motorcycles. And obviously at the time, none of the cars that I've owned in the last couple of years have been performance anything. Like the Jeep was all pretty much off-road based. The Honda Accord, I almost never drove after I started the channel, just for the simple fact that I was riding motorcycles so much. So drove the 330i up there and had an absolute blast. In the sake of the comparison between fun versus safety, and I feel like a little bit of a pansy for the sake of forsaking riding a motorcycle up there. I will eventually ride up there again once I've got Ruth all kind of buttoned up and ready. I've still got some weird throttle issues going on. I need to rejet it. But this car up there was a blast after I got everything finished. So let's back up again. So went up to the mountains in 330i, had a good time, and immediately was like, I need to get a car. Specifically, I was looking for a rear wheel drive and something that I could play with and have fun. It was cool to drive, fit my needs, and still I didn't mind looking at every day. So I started looking for BMWs, and I wasn't really like limited to them. It was, I looked at, WRXs and Evos and Mazdas and all the fun cars, all the tuner-esque sports cars, and ironically enough, BMW fell within the kind of price point that I wanted to spend. Well, I got really lucky and ended up straight trading my Jeep for a 2004 based off an ad from Craigslist where a guy had posted, said, this is everything it's got, this is everything I've done, blah 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 blah, looking for 4,500 or trades. At that point, messaged him immediately, said, hey, I've got this Jeep, this is everything I've done, this is everything that's wrong with it, what do you think? And then eventually did that deal September of last year, I think. I don't know, everything went really fast after that. So did the deal, got it registered, and 8 days later somebody rear-ended me and totaled it. I was really upset because it was a base model 330 CI, which is the coupe, but it had a 6-speed manual transmission instead of an either automatic or a 5-speed, which is pretty. Either someone had to have done the swap, or somebody ordered the base model with the 6-speed. It's not as common, so I was pretty upset. The end result, talking with my insurance company USAA, somebody had rear-ended me into the car ahead of me. It bent out both rear fender wells, and the car's a unibody, so at that point it's pretty much a total loss. The saving grace to that car, and something I didn't really find out until after I bought it back, was there was still a full-size rim spare with tire on it in the boot when it got hit, and the guy scooped me, so it pretty much hit the wheel well tire, and that's what saved the whole back end from completely crumbling in, which I was really shocked about. And BMW probably thought about that, so kudos for you guys. So found out it was totaled. Pretty. I was 100% certain it probably was. I bought it back and then sold it to the same guy who let me go up to the mountains, and took the insurance money plus that and went down to Florida and bought a ZHP 330 CI. The ZHP edition is cams, bodywork, electronics for the cams. The gauge cluster has an extended RPM, weighted shift knob, Alcantara. You're butcher me, please. Steering wheel, which is now in here. 6-speed standard on the ZHPs, or you could get it in an automatic. Sorry, yeah, let me back that up. You could get it in a 6-speed or an automatic. I don't think they made any ZHPs with a 5-speed option unless you just decided to not do that for some dumb reason. It also came with 18-inch wheels that were specific. They were style 135s. They were specific to the ZHP. No other model came with them on it. Didn't matter if you had automatic or manual. But essentially, a little bit sportier, literally 10 horsepower more. And the looks for me were pleasing. I really kind of wanted it just because of the simple fact that it was low miles. It was 99,000 miles. It was a 2005, and looked to be in really good shape for, you know, sight unseen purposes of you know, committing to going down there. Go down there, and idiot me, and this is going to be a here's your red flag. I've never bought a car used before that wasn't from a dealership, and you know, you have some level of, you know, acceptance and respect that the dealership's not going to fuck you, for lack of a better way to explain it. You have to look out a little bit more on used car sales. Some people don't give a fuck and they're just looking to get out of it, which is understandable. On other ends, some people list things for way more than what they're actually worth, because to them it's worth more, and you kind of have to play that negotiation game, which I hate. So went down there, I picked it up for $6,500, and you know, I did all the usual, you know, checking fluids and making sure that hoses weren't cracked, and getting under it and looking at specifically with these 3 Series, the rear subframe can crack and cause problems. Ugh, that was my wheel. And everything looked good. Took it for the test drive, and it had a low idle, which was strange. He claimed that it needed a tune because it had a resonator and muffler delete, and he thought that the CCV valve needed to be replaced, which is a fairly common thing, especially with the fact that for the most part, when those need to be replaced, it creates a low idle. So test drove it. It pulled well. I didn't feel like it had any, you know, major issues in comparison to my other one, although I only drove it for 8 days. Drove it out of the parking lot. Guy left. Pulled up to a stoplight 2 miles down the road, and the car started like shuddering, like it was turning off, like there was no more fuel, and I was starting to lose. What the fuck? Like my heart was going, because I was like, I just got fucked. I just bought a lemon, and I don't know what that process is, and which now I've learned. So chalked it up to low idle problem, CCV valve or something of that nature, and just kind of held the throttle a little bit, keeping everything in place. When I came to stops, what is going on here? That was crazy. Alright. I can barely see because it's fucking sun. I think that dog is like barking at that guy. So every time I pulled up to a stoplight, I would, you know, hold the throttle a little bit and keep it up so it wouldn't die out. Parked it, did some, you know, DIY garage stuff, looking at everything and making sure that it was all there and everything was there. I cleaned the ICV whenever I got it to my dad's place, and the idle was still doing the same thing. So I was like, all right, well, you know, it's probably got a vacuum leak somewhere. That's not that big of a deal. Drove it from Tampa back to Athens. drove it for another probably week or two, and then started digging into it. Took it over to a buddy of mine's shop in Johns Creek, and pretty much diaged it down to it was a head gasket, blown head gasket. And the worst thing is, when I was checking fluids, I saw, because I didn't know what it was at the time, I'm so stupid, and I beat myself up about it still. Head gasket leak repair in the coolant. If you ever see copper shit inside the coolant, fucking walk away. So, did the head gasket work, paid the shop. It was, super reasonable. One of those things where we were all like, all right, well, the head checks out well, just a head gasket, we'll swap it, do everything else, build it up. Got everything fixed. Drove it for 2 or so months, and then I started addressing coolant replacement processes. So on these cars, the coolant system is pretty much almost all plastic, and it wears out really fast. It wears out over the course of pretty much a set time frame, which for coolant system, that shouldn't really wear out that quick. BMW fucked up there, and I hate you. So started replacing coolant stuff, and in the meantime of doing this work, would smell coolant. I'd smell sweet every once in a while on startup, and if I was, sitting like in a drive-thru or something like that. So in my head, I keep going, that's the coolant problem. I'm leaking somewhere. Well, no leaks. Couldn't find any. Still, my head automatically went back to worst case scenario, and it was all right. Well, it's head gasket, which means the block is bad, or the head checked out good, but it really is bad, or whatever. Which is something that shop couldn't do. They didn't have the facilities for it. They sent the head off, and the head checked good from a head shop. So my thought was the block is toast. So fast forward about another month, I guess, and I started thinking about wanting to get a wagon. The wife didn't really like the fact that I got another 2-door, even though she kind of really wanted me to get a 4-door, which ironically for these cars, the wheelbase is identical. It's just the door that's really different. And I started seeing wagon builds that I really liked, that were clean, simple. You didn't have to do a lot for it to look really nice, and the fact that you get a full-size hatch space plus 4 doors, and it's the same wheelbase as the coupes and the sedans. So pretty much committed to it. I was like, all right, well, I want to get a wagon. So during the process of the ZHP, I had sold the F09 to try and kind of balance out costs of doing the repair works, and essentially getting money for a house down payment. So I found this car listed in one of the BMW groups I was in for $2,500, I think, or $22. I can't remember now. The guy was claiming it had a fuel delivery problem. You couldn't tell if it was the fuel pump or the fuel regulator, or the pressure regulator, which is also the fuel filter. And then there was something else. Oh, the right rear wheel bearing needed to be replaced, and he had already had the wheel bearing and all the tools, so he was just going to sell it with the car. So I go down with a trailer, looking over everything. Obviously, now having ins and outs in this body and knowing my shit for once, looked over the car, and it started right up for me, even though it was already warm, which I didn't like. I told him, for future sake, if you're selling a car, started from cold, because that's if it's already warm when the buyer gets there and you didn't drive it there, like it was in this guy's garage, you pull it out in the driveway. That's kind of a dick move, especially if you know something's wrong with it, which there was. So I look under everything. Everything looks okay. He had a coolant bleeder screw mishap where he had ended up super gluing it shut because it popped open on the freeway because it's plastic. Which I was like, all right, well, I need to fix that. That's apparent. So there's cooling stuff I'm gonna have to do. Took it for a test drive, and as soon as I pulled out of his driveway, when the front axle, quote unquote, went over the edge of the concrete to the road, I heard clunk, and it was metal on metal. And I turned and I looked at him and I said, what was that? He goes, I don't know. I was like, all right, whatever, that's fine. Go up the street, and I gingerly get it up the hill, and he goes, yeah, every once in a while it seems like the fuel cuts out, so going up this hill it may or may not make it. And the hill wasn't anything crazy. So it starts to kind of stutter, and it's an automatic, and then the transmission gear icon comes on the dash, which is not a good thing. You never want to see that light. And I turned and I looked at him and I said, man, you don't have a fuel delivery problem. You have a transmission problem, and in this particular case, you're lucky because I don't need it. And he just kind of looked at me weird, and I was like, well, I have another car. I'm planning on swapping that into this and making this a 6-speed ZHP, blah, blah, blah. I'm not too stressed about it, but we'll address that later. So it finally, I stressed it a little bit, trying to make sure that the motor was okay at least, because then I could at least sell that for something. And it finally went into limp mode, which is a good sign because that means everything was working, fail safety wise. And I was like, yep, you have a transmission issue for sure. Get it back to his driveway. I wasn't far away. Park it, look everything over again. The body was in excellent shape. I think there's only like 2 or 3 actual like mars to the metal. Everything else is like surface scratching or a paint problem. And told him, I was like, listen, I hate the whole haggling experience. I'm not a haggler. I don't believe in me trying to lowball you as much as possible to get as much of, as low as possible. Like, I feel like if I'm going to come look at something for $2,500, which what he had listed for, whatever it was, then I'm in reality willing to pay for that if it's in the right shape. If it's not, I'll knock off a respectable amount instead of just I'll give you $1,000 for it. And if you're one of those people, go die somewhere, please, because that's really annoying, especially if you're the seller and you didn't know that was a problem. So I mulled it over, and I was like, well, it sounds like you've got lower control arm, front lower control arm bushing issues in the front because it was clanging when it hit. It did. I took a look at it, and the bushings were blown when I lifted the car up in his driveway. I was like, well, that's an easy replacement. I'm not too stressed about that. I was like, my biggest concern is I was going to sell this whole drivetrain out to recoup costs of buying the car. I was like, but if this automatic is toast, it's worthless. It's pretty much a paperweight. It'd be good to a transmission shop for them to pick it up cheap for like a core and rebuild it. But for me, as a private seller, it's not worth it to me. I was like, I'll $2,000 flat cash right now. We'll sign everything and be done with it. What do you think? Which he obviously accepted. So loaded it up, get it back to Bedlam, and dropped it off. And then the following week, tore into it. I pulled the whole transmission, drivetrain, motor, all of it, gutted completely, pulled all of it out. And because the ZHP was toast, that meant I had to sacrifice the 04, the silver one, in order to make all of this work, because the block of the ZHP was bad and I did not want to rebuild the motor. So I pulled the motor and transmission out of the silver BMW, the first one, mated all of the ZHP, cams, electronics, drive shaft, differential, those all together, and put them in here, and then also did a full brake swap because the 330 CI brakes are larger than 325s. Pulled in the wheel. I obviously I swapped the T37 reps over from the ZHP onto this, and just made everything work. Just got everything plumbed up just as it would if it were just doing regular service work. While the motor was out, I did a drain pan gasket just because it was dumb easy. There was no reason not to. And after about 2 weeks of me working on it by myself, never having worked on a car before, which yes, I'm tooting my own horn because that was a fucking trial. Here it is. I had to have a buddy of mine, the same guy who did the ZHP work for me, came out with his cam lock tools in order to pull the cams out of the ZHP. Steven at SOS. Could not have done this without him, and it was awesome. It was kind of a FUBAR incident where it was almost insane, but we managed to not die. Just because we were working so late one night, we ended up putting the cams in at 180 degrees out, which you would think wouldn't be easy to do. But it is. It's really easy to do. And luckily enough, with how this car is designed, it was a perfect 180 degrees out, so none of the valves collided with anything. Thank God. And so we fixed that issue. I did new belts. We did some cooling system part swaps over from the ZHP because they were already new. New fluids, front, rear, and then I did LEDs in the rear, and shit, I guess that's it thus far. The car already came with halos in the headlight buckets, so that was pretty cool. It seems like it's a pretty expensive mod, and I'm glad it's already been done. I may end up switching it to a different setting though, because right now it comes on with the parking lights, so I may end up putting its own standalone button. But in essence, in the end of this whole charade, I now have a 6-speed ZHP wagon 3 Series that is sweet, awesome to drive. I get like 27 miles to the gallon in a 6-speed manual. This car has been a blast. So the next time I talk with you guys, I want to kind of give you a rundown of what the plan is with this, because there's always a plan. You guys know me, I can't not fuck with shit. So we're actually under contract on a house. So as soon as everything processes with that and we get settled, I will be able to bring this into my new 2-car garage, which I've never fucking owned before, and start actually making some stuff. And the first thing that seems to be on the agenda is if I can figure it out. And when I talk to you guys about this, I want to wide body it, but I don't want to do like the sedan bolt-on. Like I want to like wide body it, like fender replacement wide body it. So we'll see. That'll be in the next one. You guys will we'll discuss that further in a different video. But yeah, if you guys have any, and be thinking about that if you're in that industry, if you guys know of anything, I need a little bit more knowledge on 3D printers, 3-axis or even 2-axis wood routing tables. If you guys have any experience with that, that would be awesome. And then if any of you are fiberglass or carbon fiber gurus, please comment below, and I may email you guys back and forth and try and pick your brains on stuff, because carbon fiber is the goal, but I don't know if I should, based on the fact that I already have the metalworking skills to be able to make a wide body. Like I could do it out of aluminum, pretty simple, just a couple of tools. But carbon fiber would be sweet. So comment below, and next time I see you guys, we will discuss what the future plans of this thing are going to be. So see you later.